Mismor David, Adonai roi lo echsar. Binot asher yarbitzeni menuchot yanachaleni. Nafshi shoveh. Yanacheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki helech v'gitzon mavet. Lo irara ki atai madi. Shiftecha umishantecha hema yanachamoni. Ta'aruch lefanai shulchan neged tzurirai. Tishanta vashemen roshi kosirivaya. Ach tov chesed yirdifuni ko yamechayai b'shaviti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. I've chanted for you the words of our 23rd Psalm. On these days that seem so confusing, and days when we are searching for strength and for comfort, we often turn to the psalmist. So as we search for some degree of solace, I ask you to recite these words with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the blueness of sky and in the warmth of summer, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. And when we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too will live, for he is now a part of us, as we all remember Calvin Cohen. To you, Dee, to your children, to Nancy and Ed, also to Sue, to his sister and brother-in-law, Marge and Bert, and his grandchildren, Jamie, Amanda, Zachary, Brittany, Scott, Kelly, also to Jody, Mark, Ashley, Mark, and Maciek, and to his 3 great-grandchildren, Dylan, Benny, and Mason, and to all the members of the family, and to so many dear and cherished friends. We have gathered here today to remember, but also to celebrate the life of your beloved Cal. Our sages in their wisdom have taught us that birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, from childhood to maturity and from youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then, perhaps, to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, from grief to understanding, and from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. Cal's journey began here in Cleveland in 1932. He was one of two children born to Molly and Edward Cohen. Cal entered into this world during some of the most difficult years in our nation's history, the Depression years. And his father died when Cal was just 9 months old. His mom, Molly, did her very best as a single mom. She went to work in an office doing clerical work in order to provide for Cal and his sister Marge. The family lived on Lynn Drive in Cleveland in the 105th neighborhood. And as a teen, Cal helped the family by working as a vendor at the old municipal stadium in the mid-1940s during the Cleveland Indian ball games, after school and on weekends. And then the Cohen family moved to Oakdale Road in Cleveland Heights, and Cal attended Cleveland Heights High School, where he was an excellent student and also active in the school's bowling club. Cal was intelligent, a good and hardworking student, and so it was no surprise when he was offered a scholarship to attend Western Reserve University. As a college man on Reserve's campus, Cal studied accounting and also worked in the shipping department for Bobby Brooks. Marge, of everyone who's gathered here today, you're the one who's known Cal the longest. You recall a boy and also a man who you described as the best brother. A man who you never ever heard say an unkind word about anyone. You described your brother as a good soul. In Yiddish, we would say, literally translated, we would call that a gute neshama. And Marge, this is what you told me your brother was, truly a good soul. You said that if you needed Cal, you or anyone in the family for that matter, if you needed him, if you needed his help, you said he was Johnny on the spot. And you said that no one else ever had a better brother. And to your husband, to Cal's brother-in-law, Bert, not just brothers. Brother-in-law is not your choice, of course, but it was your choice, Bert, that you and Cal became the best of friends. He was a brother, a dear friend. You enjoyed your time together, your talks. You would go golfing and play poker. And I know that your friendship to him meant as much as his did to you. The young and lovely Dee Gorman was a student at John Adams High School, and she was at one of her club meetings, a high school sorority that was known as STA, which I learned stood for Stick Together Always. And when the gals would conclude their meetings, the guys would always show up at the end of these meetings to socialize with the young ladies. And Dee, this is how you and Cal first met. Cal and some of his buddies showed up to one of your STA meetings. And I asked you, was it love at first sight? And you assured me it was not. Dee, you told me that you remember meeting a man who was extremely quiet. You said he was not so flashy. The attraction was not immediate. But somehow, Dee, somewhere at some point, he asked you out on a date. A courtship began, and love blossomed. Dee, you and Cal were married in December of 1953, at Shakerley Hall by Rabbi Stone. And together you and your beloved shared 64 years of marriage. That's quite remarkable. In the Jewish wedding ceremony, we have a moment known as the Sheva Brachot, which stands for the 7 wedding blessings. In one of the blessings, the bride and groom are described in Hebrew by the term Re'im Ahuvim. Translated, this means loving partners. And this is what you and Cal were for more than 64 years. Re'im Ahuvim, loving partners. When you and Cal brought Nancy and Ed into this world, it felt like the Cohen family portrait was complete. You said that Cal was all about family. And Dee, you and Cal with your kids, you loved to pile into the car and take family visits to Pittsburgh where you'd see relatives. Your children recall great family vacations, but your family vacations, unlike maybe other families, always had a teaching element. There was always an educational component. And so the family vacations were to Civil War battlegrounds and to Washington, D.C., and to Stephen Foster's home, a trip that both Nancy and Ed said was quite boring, actually. But this is how you and Cal built your family. Wherever the family traveled to, there always had to be 2 things, a Holiday Inn, and the Holiday Inn had to have a diving board. In describing your husband to me, Dee, you told me that he was a man who was quiet and patient and generous and sentimental. And you also said he was not one to argue. And Nancy and Ed, when you spoke of your father, you described a man to me who you described with these words. And these are words that all of us can only hope that our children would use to describe us as that time were to come. You said your father was responsible, ethical, kind, loving, generous, thoughtful, curious about the world. And Ed, you threw in a great Yiddish word, one that is very difficult to translate, but you said he was a mensch. You both said that he took his family and his community responsibilities very seriously. Nancy and Ed, you saw a father who was also a very loving and dedicated son. You saw how he treated his mom, your grandmother Molly, his weekly visits, oftentimes taking you with him. And you also saw a dad who was always very down to earth. A man who loved his Cleveland sports teams, whether he was watching on TV or simply in his yard pulling weeds, listening to a game on the radio. He loved his teams. You also described a man who you saw as wise and well-read, and a guy who tried to keep up with technology, most recently with his Mac computer, his iPhone, and he was even on Facebook. Your dad stayed active, exercising regularly. But one of the things that both of you saw as perhaps one of his greatest attributes, aside from his love for his family and friends, was found in his volunteer work. Now, there's another term that I'll share with you today. I'm sure many of you have heard this. The Hebrew term is called tikkun olam. It means repairing the world. Now, none of us here are capable of repairing the entire world. That is a job that one human is not able to complete. But we're instructed that while we're not able to complete the job, neither are we permitted to desist from attempting to heal the world and to make it a better place for all to live. And so your dad did this. He was very active with the ARP Tax Assistant Program. He even became the director of this program for many years, and he is responsible for helping numerous people manage their finances and taxes. These were people who, some of them did not know how to do this on their own, and many of them were people who could not afford to hire someone to help them. But he volunteered his time. He also was involved with an organization called SCORE, those letters standing for the Service Corps of Retired Executives. And your dad, along with others who were involved with SCORE, they mentored people who wanted to start their own business. They wanted to start a company, or they already had a company but were in great need of sound business advice. And third, I'll just mention briefly, because we're going to hear a little bit more about that in a moment, his dedication to Montefiore, a place where he volunteered numerous hours, and a place where just a few years ago he was surprised as he was honored as Montefiore's Man of the Year. Cal was a man who lived for his family, for you, Dee. He was so dedicated and devoted and loving. He lived for his children, for his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. And to his grandchildren I say that whether you called him Grandpa or Papa, you knew that there was no grandparent who could be more proud or more in love with his grandchildren than your grandfather. It's interesting that your grandpa, your papa, was a man who grew up without a father. Yet, he was a man who grew to be an amazing father and an amazing grandfather. And so today, as we remember Cal, we say with the sages of our people, Zichron Livracha, may Calvin Cohen always be remembered for the good deeds that he performed here in the land of the living. And to this we say, Amen. Our tradition has taught us that words which come from the heart, of course, enter directly to the heart. I'd like to first call on his children, Nancy and Ed, who have words from their heart they wish to share with all of us today.
Thank you, Cantor Sabo. That was amazing. We just met yesterday and gave her this information, and it was an amazing description of my father, very accurate, and very much appreciate it. It was just wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Welcome. It means a lot to my family and myself that you're here today. In the last few days, including this morning, as the word is spread of my dad's passing, I've had so many people tell me and write to me about what a wonderful and special person my dad was. How kind he was, and what a great friend he was, how loved, how respected, how much he helped them and others, how much he'll be missed. And every time I've heard from people, including my father's business associates this morning, it just chokes me up and the tears start to flow. So I know I need to steer clear of certain things, or we're never going to get through this. I'll just be a puddle on the carpet somewhere. So my dad was a pragmatic man, if nothing else, and he would have had a plan to get through this. So my plan is, I want to tell you this morning, when I was having breakfast, I was looking for some cereal, and my mother told me where there was a box of Raisin Bran, and I pulled it out. I tore it up, and the bottom of the box was open, and the cereal basically fell out the bottom of it. My father, most likely, had opened it from the wrong end, something he had done before, and it made me smile, and it made me laugh. So what I need from all of you is that when you see me choking up and crying, I need somebody, or all of you at once, to yell out, Raisin Bran, okay? So I'm going to give you a chance right now at the count of 3. I want to hear everybody yell Raisin Bran. One, 2, 3. Raisin Bran. Thank you. That's going to help. Thank you very much. We are here to honor and remember a great man. It won't be the last time we remember him, of course, because he touched us and tens of thousands of others in so many ways. He was a role model for the kind of people we all wish we could meet, and I think we all wish we could be. He was a man who accomplished so much, yet remained humble, kind, gentle, generous, unpretentious, unassuming. He was my hero. And he had quite a story, some of which we've heard from the cantor this morning. First of all, this man was Horatio Alger. This was a man, my father, who had no father. My namesake, Edward Samuel Cohen, was a son of immigrants from Russia or Poland or Lithuania, somewhere the geographical record seems to be rather muddy. So is the nomenclature. Like many families, his seems to have decided to start life in America by taking on a new last name. I'm guessing it was to sound less foreign or to suggest that we were related perhaps to some successful Jews who were already here. And maybe it would arrive before. I could just picture Edward Samuel going up to people and say, "Hey, it's me, your long-lost cousin, Edward Samuel Cohen. Don't you remember me?" Unfortunately, as we heard, Edward S. died of pneumonia when my father was 9 months old, leaving his bride, Molly, who was part of the large Rubenstein clan, who had grown up in the Jewish orphans' home with her brother and sisters. Now, they weren't orphans, they were just poor. Their mother had passed away. After Edward Samuel died of pneumonia, Molly went to work in an office, as we heard, and Edward and Molly's second child, Sister Margie's baby brother, a little pudgy boy named Calvin. Yes, this was a pudgy person. And those who know us in his adult life would probably find hard to believe. This was a pudgy person. Can you believe it? But he eventually became the man of the house. When he was around 13, as we heard, he helped supplement the household income by working as a vendor at Cleveland Stadium. And as we heard, he was very bright, and he earned a scholarship to Western Reserve, now, of course, Case Western Reserve. While going to college, he also worked in the shipping department, as we heard, at Cleveland's the apparel manufacturer. Most of us in the room probably have heard of Bobby Brooks, which had been founded by alumni of that Jewish orphans' home, and was to be this was sort of to be a den of nepotism. Bobby Brooks was. Those who were there might remember this. I worked there myself some summers. Yes. Aunts and uncles hired sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and cousins, including that bright young accounting major over at Western Reserve. In this case, nepotism proved a brilliant recruitment strategy. Cal rose from the shipping department to the accounting department to eventually executive vice president, chief financial officer, and a member of the board of that company while he was on the Fortune 500. How did he do that? Well, a lot of it was hard work. I can still hear it, I'm sure Nancy can hear the of that rapid fire no-look keying on the adding machine or later the electric calculator. And we could hear this, from the family room for hours at night behind the closed door in his office at our house on Meadowood. Many nights the sound went on and on and on. This was a man who worked hard. But as hard as he worked, he always made time for his family. Nancy and I remember these occasional family vacations, which had mixed results, as we heard from the cantor. We're not sure, still to this day, why he thought that a couple of young children would be interested in visiting Stephen Foster's old Kentucky home. It seems like an odd choice for that. Dad taught me how to hit and catch a baseball. Matt Weisfeld's here today. His dad was my coach in Little League, and I'm sure Matt remembers my dad being at a number of games with my mom. So when I started Little League, I was surprisingly not half bad for a chubby, nearsighted, freckle-faced klutz. I played third base, and that was only because one of my favorite Indians at the time, Max Alvis, played the position. I was really ill-suited to it. I could field the ground balls well enough, but my throws over to first base were sort of like infield pop-ups. Only the slowest children would not be able to beat out those throws. And when this klutz managed to break his neck, diving into the 3-foot end of a swimming pool and conking his head on the bottom, this is me, I was in traction for more than a month at Hillcrest Hospital, and despite Aunt Marge smuggling in me a master pizza once a week, it was a pretty miserable existence for so long in the hospital. But Dad had a friend at Bobby Brooks who worked for the Indians, and he was able to arrange for my then favorite Indians player, Jack Brohammer, to visit me in the hospital. This was a man who could do things like that, and this was a man who would think of doing things like that. This was a man who, well into middle age when Bobby Brooks went out of business, he successfully steered the finances of his mail-order wood carving tool business, Leichtong, and then Century Products, which made car seats for infants. And then there was a toy company, Cap Toys, that brought the world the spin pop, the battery-powered sucker. I guess there was a need that we can't just use our tongues to lick the sucker. We need it actually spinning on an axle in our mouth. It sold tremendously well, as I recall. And as if they didn't have enough reason to love my dad, my children, all the grandchildren, now had a grandpa who worked for a toy company. What could be better? He occasionally brought them these magical gifts like a motion-sensing bowling machine and cush balls and Stretch and Fetch Armstrong and the Nolan Ryan Strike Zone baseball. My son Scott also reminded me, he remembers Grandpa being the first person to teach him that a sandwich tastes even better if you shove some potato chips in there with all the other ingredients. Some years later, the billionaire founder, serial entrepreneur Cap Toys, who my dad spoke fondly of, sent me a note. He said that my father was the smartest man he knew. This was a man who was indeed smart and knowledgeable, really about seemingly everything. He was always reading. He, of course, listened to NPR, All Things Considered daily, something I didn't really care for when I was a child. Now I can't live without. I listen to the NPR shows all the time, as my children will verify. He was always sharing these things that he learned from whatever he was reading, fiction and nonfiction. This was also a man of great personal discipline. He took care of himself. He exercised daily. When we lived in Akron, I began running 5Ks and 10K races. After his heart attack when he was only 41, he had a heart attack when he was 41. He changed his diet and began exercising diligently. Years later, he joined me in running some of these road races. It was a lot of fun. And he kept at it. He kept at it. At 80, he was still running a 5K course that he had worked out around his house on Corliss. And people, I'm sure people in the neighborhood, look at who's this guy running, this little old guy running. And he would do this. In fact, my daughter was a triathlete, Kelly, and I ran that course yesterday morning. And I thought of him. This was also a man of simple decency. I don't think I ever heard him utter a word stronger than crap. This produced quite a culture shock, though, when I went off to college and I lived in an all-male dormitory with people who had been raised in different sorts of households and used different sorts of vocabulary. It's a little surprising. This was a broad-minded man who never lectured anyone on how to live. Rather, he inspired by his example. There are countless executives who retire to a life of golf and travel and write the occasional check to charity. Not Cal Cohen. He wanted to stay active and continue to meet and help people, share his knowledge and gain more. As we heard before from the cantor, every year he devoted weeks and weeks to helping people with their tax returns at the library, helping people who are low-income, elderly folks. He delighted in telling me about some of the people he met. This was another way of he liked to meet people. He liked to learn about their lives and hear about them. He served as a volunteer member, as we heard in SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. He was president of SCORE and also the AARP Tax Assistant Program. In the 80s, he was doing books for the gift shop in Montefiore, which became an across the street sort of activity for him when he moved into Acacia. This is a Jewish nursing home across the street from Acacia Park. Acacia on the Green, I'm sorry. A couple of years ago, as you said, heard he was selected as Man of the Year. We'll hear a little bit more about that. And my sister and I flew in and surprised him at the ceremony, which was a lot of fun. Do you remember what he said? He said that the best part of it was having his family around. He said this to the people gathered there. He wanted everybody to know how much it meant to him. So that was my father. Family was his greatest delight. At my nephew Zachary's wedding in Niagara Falls just a month ago, and almost to a month, to the day after he turned 85 years old, he turned to my son Scott, who's here, and said this was one of the greatest days of his life. Raisin bran. This was a man who aged gracefully. It actually didn't seem to me that he aged at all. We talked at least weekly, nothing very serious usually, always about Cleveland sports teams. Like him, I continue to follow them religiously. I live in Reno, Nevada now. I haven't lived in Cleveland in a long time, but I still follow them religiously. And I passed this crippling genetic defect on to my own son. This is a man who never complained about anything. Most people become curmudgeonly when they get older. My father was 85 years old, but he was never an old man. Even at death, he looked like he had just nodded off on the couch while watching an Indians game. As my grieving mother has said repeatedly, he was a man who deserved many, many more years. But he passed as we would all, I think, choose to, mentally and physically able and engaged till his last day on earth. There's a lot more I could say about my dad. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. This was a man who came to the world with very little except a loving extended family and a culture that taught him to prize education, hard work, compassion, and kindness toward his fellow man. That simple formula made him a great man, a man who made his community and the world a better place. I suspect it made everyone who knew him want to be the kind of person he was. My dad was my hero. I have never considered myself half the man he was, but I have followed his example in many ways. I'll never forget him. We will all never forget him. I didn't say it often enough out loud when he was alive. But Dad, I love you. You will always be a part of me, the best part.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in and sharing this experience with us. I just want to say that my dad he was my rock. He was always there for me, and he always had the right answers. I would come to him with all kinds of questions from all different kinds of disciplines, and he would help me. He would never be judgmental. He would just say, okay, well, you could do this or you could do that, and it would be something that I could choose from, and usually it worked out all right. I reached, the past couple years, I've been working on my PhD, and I wanted nothing more than to finish my degree and have my dad see that I received it. But I know that he'll be with me, and I know that he told me numerous times in the past few months, I'm so proud of you, I'm so proud of you. And that's what's going to get me to the end, knowing that I need to do it, I need to get it done for him, and that he did know that I'm going to finish. So thank you very much. I know that my father cared for each and every one of you, and I'm glad that you all were able to come.
We are also so pleased that Diane Weiner is here with us today. Diane is the head of Volunteers for Montefiore, and it was very important to the family that she share some words with us as well. Diane?
You know what I'm about to say is true because it's repetitious of everything everybody has already said. I'm Diane Weiner, and I had the honor of knowing Cal for 8 years when I became the volunteer manager of Montefiore. Cal was a soft-spoken man with a big heart. He came to Montefiore after his retirement at the suggestion of his golf buddies to share his knowledge and business expertise with the Montefiore Auxiliary. For 20 years, he religiously came to the office, briefcase in hand, smile on his face every Monday at 9 a.m. to maintain the books, pay the bills, do the tax returns, and prepare our financial statements. In 2015, he received the highest honor a Montefiore volunteer can receive, the prestigious B. Bernstein Volunteer of the Year Award. He was really surprised and quite touched that he was being honored. When preparing for his speech, his family and colleagues described Cal as genuinely kind-hearted, wise, compassionate, generous, ethical, and a devoted family man. Cal gave his time and talents to many good causes, as we have already heard. He volunteered at South Point Hospital, for SCORE, and for ARP. For all his efforts, Cal asked for nothing in return. He did everything out of the goodness of his heart. But what he gave to our organization, and especially to me, was so much. He was my advisor. He advised me on how to manage the snack shop and gift shop. Did you know that food expenses should be about 25% of the total operating costs of the snack shop? Or that when you are pricing clothes, you should multiply the cost of the item by 2.2? I learned so much from him. He was my teacher. He explained how to do inventory, and he spent hours calculating how much merchandise was in these two important retail operations that support the programs and services for our residents. Many times he stayed so late that Dolores would call to see where he was. He was my role model in my personal life. He provided a wonderful example of how to be a great family man. He was devoted to his wife, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The first thing he would do when he came into the office was to share pictures and talk about what his kids were doing, always with a huge grin on his face and so much pride. Most importantly, Cal was my friend. We would talk when I would see him at the pool or at the gym at Acacia, where we both lived. We discussed everything: politics, sports, how the Indians and Cavs were doing, and his love of new tech gadgets was always fun to hear about. He would tell me how sometimes his son would help him adjust the computer. We spoke most recently about 2 weeks ago when we discussed getting together after the Jewish holidays to share our pictures of our children's weddings. Unfortunately, we never got that chance. Cal, I'll miss you. You've left a legacy at Montefiore for all that you've accomplished. We all will miss you.
The last word today is the sung word. Cal was a big fan of folk music, especially Peter, Paul, and Mary. And Scott Lewis, who is a dear friend of the family and has been a buddy of Ed's since the two of them were in second grade. Scott is here today. He is going to lead us in a very special song that Cal really enjoyed. And it looks like Scott will be assisted by Ed.
I'll do my best. He's the singer, though.
No, actually, she's the singer. We're going to try.
It's going to be an upbeat song. My dad would not want us to remain morose on this day.
Well, there's a little history. There was a lot of texting back and forth, and we kept coming up with songs, and they were all downer songs. And then we were debating between John Denver and Andy Williams, and we decided that a folk song by Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Happy Heart was not in your repertoire.
No, it wasn't. And the Andy Williams songs you wanted, I forget. Anyhow, please join us. Please join us as we're going to sing "If I Had a Hammer." And this is a song that I'm sure all of you know.
And please, clap along. This is a song to be clapped to. We don't have an orchestra.
Cantor, feel free to add the harmony as you see fit. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land, and I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning, I'd hammer out the love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out a warning, I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Ooh, if I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Ooh, if I got a hammer and I got a bell and I got a song to sing all over this land, it's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land.
Thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. And now, as you're able, I invite you to rise for the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim, as we ask God to accept Cal's soul. El Malei Rachamim, shochen במרומים, המסי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסעירים. את נשמת קלמן בן יהודה, שהלך לעולמה בגן עדן טרם מנוחתה. ענה בהרחמים אסתירהו, בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. O merciful God, who dwells on high, who is full of compassion, grant perfect rest beneath the shelter of your divine presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament. To our dear departed Calvin Cohen, who has gone now to his eternal home. May Cal's soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life, and grant that his memory inspire all of us to noble and consecrated living. And to this we say, Amen. Friends, I want to share with you that following the internment at the Hillcrest Memorial Park Cemetery, the family will receive visitors at the community room at Acacia, and the visitation in the community room will be today following burial until 8 p.m. and also tomorrow, Wednesday, from 4 until 8. In lieu of flowers, the family has asked anyone wishing to make a contribution in memory of Cal that you please consider the Lador Fund of the Jewish Federation of Cleveland. On behalf of the entire family, we thank you for your love and support today.